Hello, everyone, and welcome to Practical Inclusion for another week. It is cold, wet and miserable down on the land of the Wadawurrung people, which is where I come to you from today, and pay my respect to their elders past, present, emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who happen to be watching us live or on the replay. And today we're going to Facebook, LinkedIn and YouTube all at the same time. So wherever you're tuning in, certainly my respects to you. Tanja, just before we jump in, whose land are you broadcasting in from today?
I'm on the Wurundjeri. I'm up in Mount Dandenong, covered in misty clouds today. And I also pay my respects to elders past, present, emerging, acknowledge that these lands were never ceded in battle or bargain, always were, always will be.
And in lockdown, is that correct?
Oh, yes. Lockdown 4, electric boogaloo. I mean, it's not quite as entertaining as lockdowns 1, 2, and 3. By the time you get to the 4th in the movie series, it's starting to lose its edge.
Yeah, I could only imagine. As a Geelong resident, obviously we experience the lockdown, then we get let out really quickly, and so my heart absolutely goes out to all of you. Yeah. So hopefully we might provide some entertainment for those of you who are also in lockdown for the next 30 minutes. Please add comments, questions as we go along. I'll get to them if we can, and if not, we'll respond to them afterwards. And even if you're watching on the replay, please comment. We'd love to have this as an ongoing conversation. Let's kick off in the usual fashion. If you could please let me know your story. What brought you to the work that you're doing, Tanja? For those of you who didn't catch the post, Tanja is the CEO of GenVic, and we'll get to what that is later. But what brought you here? How did you end up with this role, and why do you do this work?
Well, I think, is it embarrassing to say that it's like a life work thing? Probably shouldn't have that. I shouldn't have that. I probably would do this. I can't really do it without pay because I'm not wealthy enough to do that. But it's a passion project. So I've been engaged in gender equity advocacy of some sort since university days, and then and probably thought that at some point after I'd sort of cut my teeth on campus-based feminist activism that I wouldn't need to do it, so much once I went into the workforce, and my degree was a law degree, and I was just flabbergasted at the gender discrimination within the legal profession. So everything that you've seen about having a High Court judge, engaged in Me Too moment, sexual harassment incidents, that's just my own experience of what the law was like. And so I did that for a decade and realised that I really did want to return into gender and community-based advocacy, managed gender-based NGOs for a while, and then had a very, very wonderful opportunity to be the Chief of Staff to the late Fiona Richardson, who was the former Minister for Family Violence, the first family violence prevention minister in the state of Victoria and actually in the country. And together we did a whole lot of reforms. She wrote on a napkin on the day that I started, sitting beside her, "We will do this together." And it was great. I don't know, she made the decision to bring a feminist activist into the office, which I'm sure perplexed a number of people. I'm always grateful for that experience. But of course she passed away, and she passed away from breast cancer on the job, didn't want to leave the position. And that was pretty traumatizing. It also wrapped around for me that the idea of just how much self-care you need to do when you're engaged in social change work at whatever level. So that matters a great deal to me. And then, I took some time away and then came back into this unique role, which as the peak of gender equity organisations, practitioners and advocates across the state, and have been working firstly as a consultant and now as in the sort of full-on role of CEOs for the last 18 months, 2 years.
Amazing. So it was like almost your calling from get-go, this type of work.
Yeah, and even in legal practice, I found like I was engaged in human rights cases that often had a gender lens. So we did like police misconduct litigation involving where there was like sexual harassment and sexual violence towards women. So we did some human rights cases in that space. Yeah, I just seem to gravitate towards that work. And I must admit, I love to work with women leaders. So I've spent most of my professional career working and nurturing the leadership of women and gender diverse people. So that's been really satisfying for me, and I love that work.
Yeah, awesome. You've touched a little bit on, what I see perhaps as the two extremes of working in inclusion, inequality, whichever way you might be, in that pride and joy that comes with doing this type of work, and the passion and the ability to act on your passions, and what really motivates you, but also that need to highlight self-care, and that this work can be really challenging. Did you want to elaborate a little bit on those two extremes?
I think the global statistics now tell you what the problem is. And, to know that to actually get to gender parity, it's going to take another 200 plus years is pretty confronting. And it was, if my 20-year-old self had known that, I think I would be even pretty traumatized. It's hard enough having learned it at 40 that it's the case that my daughter's daughter is not going to really see gender parity. When you realise that, it means that you've got to be, when you're engaged in this practice, you are engaged in longevity work. You are not going to see the change it's not like whittling a beautiful icon out of wood, or sewing something, or making a car. And the product that we're ending up with is a layered contribution over generations, standing on shoulders of previous sisters and suffragists who've already laid some of the foundations. And so I think there's an element already of trauma associated with the knowledge around that. So you've got to have that strength and commitment. Plus, I never discount backlash. I don't know about you, Bree, but working in this space, you have to be strong to cope with backlash, because it's pretty intense.
It absolutely. and for me, I think the backlash that is the most intense is more the covert backlash, the things that are actually really hard to challenge because it's insidious and it's over time. Just picking up on that longevity that you were talking about, I find that particularly challenging working in the workplace inclusion space, because organisations and people and leaders do think that we are nearly there, and that it is about a 3-year action plan, and then we've created gender equality. It can be really hard to raise people's understanding and awareness of the extent of the issue. Do you find that in your advocacy work as well, that a lot of it's still kind of building understanding around the fact that there is gender inequality?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that because so much of the advocacy has come in waves. And why do we call it waves? Why have we done that? Because there is a sense that it crescendos, but then it also dips away. It doesn't stay It doesn't stay as a permanent feature. And I talk about this policy area oscillating wildly. And I certainly had this experience when I was working in the ministerial office with Fiona, that, she, at the time I started with her, it was a very new government. And so there had been a period of time when there wasn't a focus in gender equality. Now, can you imagine being the roads minister and coming into a roads department to take responsibility for roads, and people would say, there's no roads. Like we did away with roads for 4 years. We don't have roads. But whenever you are the women's minister, there is a challenge. There's almost an complete oscillation sometimes because of the approach that we have had in this country and across the world to this issue, rather than it being accepted as being something that we work together collectively on. There is often a contested fight about whether this work is of value or not. And so you're rebuilding each time and it oscillates. So, yeah, I think that's that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, in this work, is to keep the momentum ongoing. And I do see that one of the reasons that I think one of the roles I think GenVic has is to stand aloofly outside of that government space and to get community, business, public, NGO, ordinary individuals who are committed to this work to sustain it on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I like that. I like that picture in my head now of that oscillating interest, I suppose, in terms of where governments sit with relation to gender. Right now in Victoria, we seem to be in, I don't know how to describe it. I think before, when we were talking, you used the word transformational time, really, when it comes to gender equity. Can you explain for those who are listening in what is happening currently in the state of Victoria with regards to gender equality?
Well, we have a government that has decided to make a significant commitment. First of all, it did it through opening up a Royal Commission into family violence prevention, which I think was family violence, which was just landmark. And if you're going to do something about family violence, you can't not look at the drivers of that violence, of which gender inequality and poor attitudes, bad behaviours towards women are a huge driver of that violence. It started off with that kind of policy and funding investment to address that issue, and then it transformed into wanting to act to create a gender equality strategy, which was a part of the project that I was involved in. And now a brand new legislative regime, which is going to impact on 300 public sector entities, so a huge amount of organisations and individuals will be covered by an act which requires compliance with gender equality indicators and gender equality action planning, workplace gender auditing. It's a full legislative regime of accountability and compliance that you need. Targets and setting a gender plan and having a plan for change is what achieves change for gender equality.
Yeah, and obviously I'm going to totally agree with that, considering that is what I do for a living. I must admit I've kind of tracked the progress of this act originally when I was working at Deakin University and then moving into private practice. And it's been interesting to see the steps along the way and the levels of engagement. And now what I find really interesting is this is a significant ask from the Victorian government on those organisations. It's a big piece of work, which is incredible. But I also think right now we're in this quite interesting position where there are many of those organisations wondering how they deliver on this work. Are we going to see, and of course the danger is that we're going to see a fair bit of tokenistic type action to tick the boxes and meet the requirements. What are your thoughts around the capacity for this legislation to actually create change and not become another one of those tick box exercises?
I think there's a significant, I'm very, very hopeful about that. And I think there's a significant commitment at the commission level and from the commissioner herself to not have that happen. And leadership is a big part of that journey. And certainly the Minister for Family Violence and Women and the Commissioner are very strong on that issue. Our members who have been engaged in this work for a long time, before there was an act, have never wanted to do it as a ticker box exercise. So they've always taken the approach of gender equality change being transformational and being something that was about capacity building as well across a number of different settings. So we have a number of members who actually got appointed to the panel of providers to assist in the transformational change, and GenVic has also got a consortia of organisations that it's part of that process. And we're certainly, like you, Bree, are not encouraging the ticker box process.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to do it, though, too, because if you do the workplace gender audit properly and go through all of the indicators, there's a lot of work to do looking at workplace gender segregation, looking at the makeup of your board, the composition of your workforce, investigating and doing analysis around your pay equity. Not a lot of organisations, even the ones that have sort of led some of this work before the Act came in, have got all of their dots dotted and T's crossed in this space.
Yeah.
So there's we're very busy. The Commission's very busy. I'm sure you're very busy.
Absolutely, and I would totally agree with you. I think there is an opportunity for some organisations to approach this like a tick box exercise and perhaps maybe get through the first iteration of this. I'm not sure. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But from what I'm seeing, the organisations are coming to me because they're realising that this is bigger than potentially they thought, and that they do actually need to deliver some change here. And if they're going to do this exercise, they need to do it properly, and rely on people like yourselves and others to provide some expertise and understand how they might create change whilst doing this process.
And don't we know that there is a high risk that there will be some organisations who don't take this seriously and then end up 5 minutes to midnight in October scrambling to try to create gender equality action plans, which are poorly thought through. Yeah. I think my strong advice to anyone listening today is that if you're servicing or supporting an organisation like that you don't, try to work pretty hard not to have that happen, because, to do it properly, you do actually need to be demonstrating consultation with organisations. You need to be looking and doing the analysis of your data, and the planning and using and deciding what kinds of strategies and tools that you're going to use is really a tailored journey for each organisation. There are tried and proven strategies that will work in any setting, but to do honour to that work in your particular region, your demography, the service that you're providing, you want to not do it at a surface level. Otherwise, I think there's also a high risk of there being backlash too. If you don't get buy-in with any kind of strategy, doesn't matter what it is, then it just falls apart. And because there's a longitudinal piece of work to do here, it's worth investing in this first iteration pretty deeply so that you've got that organisational buy-in.
I think absolutely, because I think the organisations who don't do it properly are going to cop backlash from both sides of the coin. So you're going to get backlash from those who aren't engaged and don't believe the business should be focusing so much on gender equity, but you're also going to cop backlash from the women and gender diverse people, and feminists more broadly, regardless of gender. If you don't do it properly, you're going to cop backlash from those people as well. So it puts organisations in a place where they really need to do this properly.
And I think just to bring this close to home about what has happened with COVID-19 too, because we have had this totally unexpected global pandemic that has exposed gender inequality in ways that have really brought it home to ordinary people in their own homes of confronting gender-based unemployment issues, lack of access to job seeker because they didn't qualify for 12 months because they're mostly in casualised roles, essential service jobs that have been really at the care sector end that have been traditionally less well paid than in other areas like construction and mining, but then find themselves being essential in the pandemic. That whole gendered lens on COVID-19 has meant that the attention of women in Australia and around the world on what is happening to me, what is happening in my life, and why is it not as easy as somewhere else, that has been I think that's been a bit transformational around how much pressure there is on governments and other organisations to do the change or attention to detail than has ever been done before, because there's going to be greater amounts of accountability. Women want to know what is being spent in a budget for them. Gender diverse people want to know what is being spent in the budget specifically for them. They want to know what the special measures are that are being done to assist their development and equality.
Love it. Absolutely. And I think that's why, for those who do work in this space, that's why we are seeing so many organisations step into diversity and inclusion who hadn't done so before, because the pressure is now, quite significant, because it has been this kind of lifting of the blinds in some respects. And yeah, as you said, taking back to your comment around the oscillating wave, or the waves, and we're certainly seeing that now. I'd love to step back. We had a comment from Edwin here, stepping back to our previous conversation around advocacy and self-care, and they were talking specifically about LGBTIQA plus and advocating in that space and the backlash. Now, I know there's occasionally a little bit of tension between the idea of work that is done around prevention of violence against women and its inclusion of people who are gender diverse and the LGBTIQA plus community in general. But I know from watching you, following you, and hearing you speak previously, that that's certainly not the position that you take. What can we talk a little bit more about self-care and advocacy when you are working in these spaces where you're getting this backlash? What do you do personally to help, I guess, I don't want to say put a wall up, because I think when we do that, we're not successful in the jobs that we do. But what self-care, how do you manage your own self-care in this space when you are receiving that backlash?
Well, Bree and Edwin, thanks for asking that question and reflecting on that. I was talking about within the context of advocacy work generally in this space. And I do include that I think LGBTIQ advocacy and gender and sex-based advocacies, they've got very strong similarities in the kinds of backlash that we experience. There's a similar oscillation risk in LGBTIQ advocacy as there is in gender and sex-based advocacy. So what I can't put walls up. I've never been good at separating out my own passion and emotional commitment and empathy from my work. It's just not how I want to do work, and it's not what I think is the best thing to deliver outcomes either. So I do have to practice strong self-care. For me, it's a combination, all of which is quite hard in lockdown, I have to say. I have my own, I have a very strong commitment to yoga. I've been practicing that for a very long time. I am dependent on massage therapy. So that's really hard in lockdown, not having it. I really enjoy water and being in the water. So I'm missing doing some of my water sports activities as well a little bit too. So it has been, self-care is much harder in lockdown. And I think the mental health statistics that we're seeing, there's been just an absolute blowout of mental health statistics, poor mental health outcomes, particularly for women. During lockdown, and that's been quite challenging. But they're all wonderful supports for me. Still doesn't mean that it isn't still pretty hard. Yeah, there are days when I am challenged by it still, despite all of those self-care tips. In a structural sense within GenVic, the self-care that we have a couple of things that we do. Communities of practice are a big self-care structural thing that you can do when you're engaged in this work. If you enable there to be spaces, to create spaces for care and listening and exchange, and we have a number of them. We have one for sexual and reproductive health workers, one for gendered violence workers, one for people who engage in gender equity and communications. And we invite all of our, members to participate in those spaces. They're critical. We have a very, very big one that is dedicated just to women's health service workers who are focused on sexual and reproductive health and primary prevention work, and that's really at mostly at a CEO and CEO and advocacy manager level COP, and it's they're really important, those opportunities.
It's interesting because I was going to say the same thing in the LGBTI QA plus space. For me, when I am receiving backlash around that, of course, it is backlash against yourself personally, and I'm the same as you, Tanja. I don't put up the walls and the barriers, because what creates impact is the fact that I put myself in those spaces, and that I leave myself open for those questions and for the backlash that might come. So it's part of the work and what makes me effective. But in terms of managing that backlash, it is having a community of people to unload that on, who hopefully it doesn't become too much of a burden for them, but to be able to share those experiences and understand that we are doing good work, and reminding each other that we are doing good work, and that we belong in this space, and we belong in the world as LGBTIQA plus people, and that we need to give each other that time.
You know what, Bree? We also took the approach last year that self-care needed to be seen to be politicised, but also fun. And so we actually created a day last year where we said self-care is a political act, and we engaged in things like a meditation, Zumba, a quiz, some silly competitions. We baked scones with the CFA, with the CWA, like we did, because there's a moment where the seriousness of this work where you actually need as a collective to down tools and go, wow, okay. I mean, by the October, all of us, once those, the deadline for gender equality action plans is over, there's going to need to be a collective State of Victoria gender equality advocate. Sigh. I hope the Commissioner will be joining us, because it's a massive piece of work that we're all working on to support this transformational piece.
Yeah, absolutely. We've reached our 30 minutes. So I have obviously loved this conversation, and would love to chat again sometime. So maybe you'll be up for that.
I knew it would take about 5 minutes. We're just going so quickly. We'd have so much to say to each other.
We do. Thank you to all of you who've been listening and commenting. Please feel free to share this video around. It is being broadcasted to YouTube Live, and within the next 6 to 8 hours, depending on how fast YouTube works, and then we edit, it will have captions. And so if you want to wait and share till tomorrow, you'll have the captions on it ready to share. I'll be back again next week. New guest, new topic, as always, and you'll notice that these are becoming a lot more regular than they were, because I now have the wonderful support of Tanja Roy, who's working in the background to engage guests, and to come up with topics and to organise all of this. So please, if you have guest topics, send them through to myself, or you can find Tanja Roy on LinkedIn on our business page. Again, thank you so much.
You all need a Tanja. That's what you need. Exactly. Great to work. Great to spend time with you, Bree.
Oh, no, you too. Thank you so much. And thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.